Hello, this is Shariff Abdullah, and today I'm going to do a little mini course on the concept of deep identity, deep conflict, and deep connection. So in terms of identity, there's a number of different ways that you can identify yourself. You can identify yourself by what city you live in. You can identify yourself with your hometown basketball team. You can identify yourself on a political spectrum. You're Democrat or Republican or Independent or something like that. And all of those things together make up your identity. But there are parts of your identity that you acquired at a very, very early age. There were parts of your identity that you acquired before you acquired the concept of rational thought. What I mean by that, there are a number of child psychologists that suggest that children develop the concept of abstract and rational, concrete thinking somewhere around the ages of 7 or 8 or 9 years old, depending on which one of these psychologists you're talking about. But we know that the parts of our identity that there are parts of our identity that we can see that were in place well before we were 7 or 8 or 9 years old. So the parts of our identity that we're able to perceive that preceded our ability to do rational thought is what I call deep identity. This is what I refer to as deep identity. So I see that deep identity has 5 different aspects to it. Number 1 is race, ethnicity, and culture. Now, we as adults know that race is different from ethnicity, and ethnicity is different from culture. But when you are a child, when you are growing up, this is all mixed together for you in some way. So race, identity, and culture becomes a way that you experience deep identity. The second part is language. Now, in terms of your language, you don't say, well, these people who are my adults, or who are my parents, they are speaking whatever language you speak at home. But the things that the language that I choose to speak is Mandarin Chinese or Icelandic or something like that. You didn't choose it. What you did is speak the language of the adults that were around you. And that's how you picked up language. And language becomes imprinted on you as a part of your deep identity. You can't think about it rationally. In fact, if you try to think about it rationally, you're thinking in the language that's been imprinted upon you. The third thing is class. And this is very subtle because the markers of class in a culture can be very subtle. But if you are wealthy or if you were very poor, you were raised with certain cultural assumptions and raised in such a way that you can be identified in terms of your class. Now, in terms of the fourth marker is in terms of religion. Your religion, people who are raised religious are raised within a particular set of cultural confines. Now, that's not as evident in this society as it is in other societies. In other societies, the clothes that you would wear, or the school that you go to, or your practices on a daily basis would be dictated by your religion. And then the fifth marker is your gender. From the time that you were brought home from the hospital and you were wrapped in a blue blanket if you were a boy and a pink blanket if you were a girl, people started to treat you differently. And they started treating you differently because in this culture we treat boys different from girls. And that starts to be imprinted upon us before we even know what the difference between a boy and a girl is. You know that you are a boy, you know that you are a girl, although you don't know what that means to be a boy or a girl. Now, when we start looking at these markers, we start to see how deeply embedded the question or the concept of deep identity is. And we start seeing how this can affect our behavior as adults. When we look at these 5 factors, we don't think of these as cultural markers. We consider these things to be reality. This is the reality that we are facing. And the deep identity markers can become the rallying point or the downfall that creates deep conflict. Now, deep conflict is very simple. Deep conflict is a conflict that's based on deep identity. And when we start looking at the 90+ wars, it's 90 wars happening on the planet right now, we can start seeing that almost all of them are a function of some level of deep identity. There's some conflict around race, ethnicity, and culture. There's some conflict around language. There's some conflict around religion. There's some conflict around class. And the way gender plays into that is that most of the conflicts on the world are placed on the backs of women. Okay, so that whether the victors or the losers, women bear the brunt in warfare. And so these conflicts are so deep, they go so far because of the deep identity aspects of them. It's hard for us to think about the nature of the conflict without thinking about the nature of deep identity and the nature of our deep connectedness, our deep consciousness. So while it looks as though it's very, very difficult to deal with deep conflict because it's based on deep identity, the good news is if we start to deal with conflict in that way, when we see a conflict that's based on race, ethnicity, and culture, or language, or class, or religion, or gender, to recognize immediately, here we have a deep conflict. We have a conflict that we can't talk about because our languaging itself keeps us confined to a particular reality. So you have 2 different realities butting heads. So what we have to do is start looking at how can we address this deep conflict and get down below the language, the level of language, to really get to the essence and the core of what it means for us to be human and actually to be on this planet right now. The good thing about this is that once we get people to see this issue or this aspect that we're calling deep identity, people can begin to separate out and just begin to think rationally about something that they've never really thought about rationally before. So by being able to get people to start looking at their deep identity simply as another aspect of identity, simply as another aspect of how we are connected with each other on the planet, then we can start seeing, we can start making some strides toward the 3rd factor, which is deep connection. Once we recognize our connectedness with each other, we can start to see some really amazing things happen. Once we let go of difference around race, ethnicity, and culture, difference around language, or difference around class or the other deep identity factors, we can start connecting people together in ways that are truly powerful and truly meaningful. If we do that, when we do that, I believe that we'll be able to transcend the 90 wars happening on the planet, to be able to have people talk to each other and talk to each other in a much more powerful way. I've been involved in issues of conflict resolution for a number of years. And one of the problems of conflict resolution is that you have people who are experiencing deep conflict. Remember, conflict based on deep identity that they can't even think about. And you put them in the room together and you have them talk about their issues. Well, they're talking about apples and aardvarks. They're not talking about the same thing. So what we can do is to bring people together in such a way that they all recognize, oh, I'm on really soft territory here. And I'm on soft territory because I'm not able to think about this clearly because it's an aspect of deep identity. And everybody around the room is facing the same aspect. A lot of times in conflict resolution, the resolution is, why can't you people over there look at the world from my reality? Well, you can't because they have a different deep identity. And so by getting everybody to recognize the power of deep identity, I believe that we can get to an aspect of conflict resolution that has true depth to it, a true ability to bring people together in a powerful way. Okay, so this has been a short mini course on the concept of deep identity and to see how this can lead to either deep conflict or deep connection. So thank you.